Some brands offer you low finance, or cashback, or servicing.
Renault don't do ors. We do ands. The Renault Kadjar with 1.91% APR and €1,000 cashback and 3-year servicing, saving you thousands. Renault, the brand with the ands. Visit your local Renault dealer. Finance is made under a hire purchase agreement. Terms and conditions apply. Deposit required subject to lending criteria. See Renault.ie.
No risk it, no biscuit.
Coming from the Arizona desert, presented by SBNation.com. For Arizona Cardinals fans, by Arizona Cardinals fans, with outsider and insider's perspective, this is Revenge of the Birds. Good night, Arizona Cardinals fans. This is Revenge of the Birds Radio, and I'm your host, Jess Root, from RevengeOfTheBirds.com. And we are here tonight. It's a Tuesday night once again after an Arizona Cardinals victory as they defeated the Tennessee Titans on Sunday afternoon by a score of 37-34 in overtime. Something that, you know, probably shouldn't have happened considering they had a 34-17 lead in the fourth quarter. But nonetheless, they got the win. They are now 9-5 heading into the final 2 weeks of the season, and they are still in the running for the playoffs. Take a look back. We'll just kind of highlighting what we had. It was not the best defensive effort the Cardinals had, and they did though lock down Chris Johnson. And not that it's been terribly difficult to do this season. He held him to 40 yards on 13 carries. And we have with us tonight, as we always do, Seth Cox. How are you doing tonight?
Good, Jess. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for coming on with us again as we welcome back to... We took a week off. That's my fault. We took a week off. You know, regular job kind of gets in the way sometimes and kind of overwhelms things. But we're back talking football, even though it's kind of a bittersweet time of the season, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it's been interesting. It's getting to the point of excitement, but very tempered excitement, and maybe some harsh reality setting in. And that's what we're going to talk about. That what Seth's referring to, obviously, if you haven't been following super close to the playoff race, Arizona Cardinals at 9-5, they're on the precipice of having one of their best seasons they have. Well, obviously, since coming to Arizona, if they win one more game, they will have matched the best season they've ever had. And it doesn't look pretty for the playoff picture. A lot of moving parts, and it's a long shot. Not because of what the Cardinals have done per se, but just the NFC's really competitive this year, and the fact that the Cardinals play in the NFC West kind of made things messy. So let's get to the game, though. Talk about the good and the bad. The observations you had from the game on Sunday, what was the good and what was the bad for you, Seth? I think the good has to start with Andre Ellington being back on the field and just looking like Andre Ellington. He, at the end of the game, he obviously got nicked up a little bit, but he definitely looked explosive again. He's just their best. You hate to say this with Floyd and Fitz and even Palmer thrown there, but it just seems like he's their best offensive player, at least the most consistent producing when he gets touches. The only thing that seems to have held him back so far this year, it seems like, is a lack of touches, and then the banged up knee that he got in practice that I don't know if the story's ever actually come out still. That was good. You had to like the offensive line blocking for Ellington in the run game. Again, you get a good effort in the run game blocking and then a poor effort in pass blocking. It just seems like this offensive line can't put together a whole game where they do well in both scenarios. And then I thought the resiliency they showed, just the fact that, a lot of teams, and not even Cardinals teams of years past, but just a lot of teams in general would have kind of folded up the tent at that point and gone home and just,
been okay. Not okay, obviously, but would have just taken the loss. And this Cardinals defense, they kind of took it personal that they screwed up, they gave up the game, and let's make a play to get this back in it. And Antoine Cason, despite getting beat quite a bit during the season when he had the chances to play, played obviously his best game as a Cardinal in a very important one.
And at least on the good side, I was very, truthfully, you had to be pleased what they were able to do offensively overall. They ran the ball 36 times for 145 yards. You had the big plays by Ellington, but you also had, and the more the season goes on, I think every bit as important to Andre Ellington's play and the way, the dynamic play that he's had so far in those big plays, the fact that he has a guy like Rashard Mendenhall to take those workhorse carries just makes Ellington that much better. Rashard Mendenhall had himself a very Rashard Mendenhall game, 21 carries, 69 yards, 3 1/3 yards a carry, but he's the guy that, and I'm seeing it more and more into the season, he softens up that middle of the defense to create that space at Ellington. And Ellington takes advantage of it. Not to diminish. I don't want to diminish what Ellington's done, but it really is a nice pair that they've developed. That once Arians has found the right mix, and using Ellington in the backfield, using him as a receiver, I was really impressed. And I'm kind of interested in what happens with him moving forward. How much we actually see him. If we'll see him lined up more as a receiver in the years to come, as Palmer himself said after the game, that give Ellington an off-season to work on it, he would be a number 2 receiver on most teams. Very complimentary. I liked how the offense moved the ball. Obviously, it came almost out of necessity as the defense, on one hand, did well in the running game, but were absolutely torched by Ryan Fitzpatrick for some strange reason. So I was very pleased with that. I was very pleased to see what the depth stepped up. That was a very good thing that we saw, is the players going down and seeing that depth step up. And you got plays from Tony Jefferson. You got plays from Antoine Cason. You had a touchdown by Jake Ballard. You saw Britton Golden get a key first down reception. It's good to see contributions from all over the place. And then there's the other things, the bad side. Obviously, you look first and foremost at Ryan Fitzpatrick's 400-plus yards passing. And the fact that it had a 17-point lead in the fourth quarter where it looked like, oh my goodness, it's a laugher. And then all of a sudden, shades of Vince Young in 2009 came around. And if it... God, that could have been a crushing defeat for the Cardinals. Well, for you, Seth, what was the biggest bad or the greatest bad that you saw coming out of that game?
I don't understand how they made Ryan Fitzpatrick look like Ben Roethlisberger. That was confusing to me. This defense has been lauded, and rightfully so, for some really impressive things. But it just seems like they have a tendency to play down to their competition at times on the road, especially early in games. We saw it, obviously, with the Jaguars in the first couple series. We saw it in the first half against the Titans, and then in the last, I think it was 6 minutes. You just wonder why this defense is doing that. There's too much talent to play that way. I understand there's injuries, but Patrick Peterson was really bad in coverage on Sunday. I mean, the Titans went right at him at will, and I mean he looked not even good at times. He was just bad, and then the run defense has been great all season. You can't really take anything away from that. It was a very I was shocked at how bad the pass defense was at times, and it wasn't Delaney Walker, it was Kendall Wright, and it was Nate Washington, and it was guys kind of torching.
Who?
Yeah, exactly. Just torching, Patrick Peterson, something you don't expect to see on, every once in a while maybe, but not not Ryan Fitzpatrick as the quarterback, not, like you said, not Kendall Wright and Mike Preston and Nate Washington. Like that was the most concerning thing I took away from it. And obviously the continued struggles of allowing Palmer to get hit time after time. It's truly is amazing he's played every snap this year.
It really is. That's a discussion actually for another time, is just to see. And I'll admit, when it comes to the whole Kevin Cobb debacle, as some might want to call it, a terrible move, I was a big Kevin Cobb fan, and as a person, as a guy who's out there, he got paid a lot of money to not produce a whole lot. His body failed him, because there wasn't any doubt about his actual toughness. He his body wasn't cut out for football, I guess. At the pro level, it's just interesting, because Carson Palmer, he gets rolled up on, and it's the sprain, and he doesn't come out. And Steve Keim said he was worried about his knee being done. And Palmer just, he has an elbow injury against Philadelphia. He plays the whole game. He doesn't throw a single pass in practice the entire week, and then he puts one of his best games in recent history. Now he has the ankle injury, and then he plays the rest of the game. He's been playing fantastic football, and to do so, he is just a tough guy who not only has the toughness to play, his body holds up, which is, considering the years that we've had, we've seen we saw how players get. We had Derek Anderson have his concussion. We saw Max Hall's brittle shoulders. We've seen Matt Leinart and his collarbone. We had Kevin Cobb and his everything. And then Carson Palmer, who granted, he hasn't been sacked the number of times that Kevin Cobb and John Skelton, Ryan Lindley, and Brian Hoyer were. He certainly has been hit quite a bit, and he gets up and he stays in the game, and he makes throws, and especially the way he's played recently, you have to look at that. So, wow, it's one of the better. I mean, it's kind of I don't know how much is awe and how much is just bad, that you look at the season that Carson Palmer has and you say, wow, that's one of the best quarterback seasons we've ever seen here.
Yeah, and to kind of, not to get too much into the offensive line, but the offensive line, if you go by Pro Football Focus pass block efficiency, they're actually the worst rated offensive line in pass blocking efficiency in the history of Pro Football Focus.
Oh my gosh.
They've
Where's
got
the last year?
Yes, they have a 69.6 pass blocking efficiency. The lowest grade before that in any season was a 71, I want to say. So that record's going to be broken by two teams this year: the Cardinals at 69, and then the New York Giants at 70. So it's bad in general, but the Cardinals, they have the worst offensive line in pass block efficiency in Pro Football Focus history. So that's just how bad they've been this year.
Oh, goodness. Now, looking at some of the other, we kind of got back onto the we kind of strayed back and forth on good and bad. But obviously, another one of the more concerns coming out of that game, obviously, was the injury situation. Cardinals were already a man down in the secondary, with Tyrann Mathieu being down for the season with his knee ligaments that were torn. They lost Rashad Johnson near the end of the game to a high ankle sprain. He is not likely to play this weekend. And Larry Fitzgerald with his concussion on the onside kick. Carson Palmer with the ankle injury as well. And it's at a time going into the final two games of the season, which, if you looked on the calendar at the beginning of the season, if the Cardinals were going to be competitive, those were probably going to be the two biggest games of their season, and they're not at full health. So you have to be concerned about that situation there.
Yeah, and you look at it, and it's somebody talked about it the other day on Twitter. I retweeted it. I don't even know who the person was. I just found it interesting that they pointed out the number of injuries the Seahawks have had everywhere, and it's it's just kind of crazy that the Cardinals, the 49ers, the Seahawks, all three teams, with winning records, and all three teams at the top, in first, second, and third in this division, and you go to the Rams as well. Just
they left Bradford for the year. So
just
significant
all the
injuries on all four teams
in this division, and they're still good. They're still all good teams. You put any of the four teams, obviously Seattle and San Francisco, but you put the Cardinals or the Rams in probably any other division in the NFL outside of maybe the AFC East and AFC West, and they're probably in first place. And you could probably say that about the Rams too. The way that they play some weeks, it's just But yeah, it's you want to have full strength going into the biggest game of the Bruce Arians era, and you're just not even really close to it at this point. And it's not just little injuries. It's guys that are important. You have Fitz. You've already lost probably your most versatile defensive player in Tyrann Mathieu, and now you've lost his backup. So you're rolling out a third-string undrafted free agent rookie in Tony Jefferson, and I like Jefferson. He's a good player, but you're kind of throwing him to the wolves in week 16 and 17 going up against the Seahawks and 49ers. So it's going to be interesting.
Let's jump ahead a little bit. We were going to talk a little bit, and those of you who are listening, if you are listening live, you can call in at 646-478-3787. You can talk to me, talk to Seth, and get on the air here on Revenge of the Birds Radio. We had planned, we're going to be talking about, obviously, the good and the bad for the game, as we just have. The hopes for the playoffs. How much hope should we have? Talk about the depth that stepped up. Talking about with the playoff situation, we also know it does seem unlikely, it does seem improbable that the Cardinals will make it. How should we as fans see this season? How should we look at this season? And then look ahead to the game this week against Seattle and their chances, if there are any, to somehow come away with a win there at CenturyLink and Seattle. I'm going to skip the playoff talk. We're going to talk about the depth that stepped up. And talking about that defense, it's kind of interesting. The comments that Patrick Peterson made after the game was he was asked about the absence of Tyrann Mathieu, and while if you look at the play in itself and the Peterson, and I wrote a piece using some of the stats I looked up on Pro Football Focus, Patrick Peterson had his worst statistical game as a coverage as he's ever had. He was targeted 10 times, and he gave up 9 receptions. He'd never given up that many receptions ever in 3 years, and that goes with his rookie year in which he was targeted a lot. They threw at him a lot his rookie year. Obviously that goes into whatever. Peterson did make the comments about Mathieu not being out there, and how putting new guys out there, they needed probably a game to get used to playing with one another. They're obviously, with what happened with Fitzpatrick, his 400-plus yards, there were clearly communication problems, whether that is the result of Gerard Powers moving outside inside, having a guy like Kaysen who's gotten very minimal playing time. You've seen him on and off as a dime back, now being placed on the outside where he's more comfortable, honestly. But I wonder how much of that affected the defensive backfield overall. And Peter said that after a game under their belts, they'd probably have everything cleared up heading into the game next weekend. But Peterson had a tough game. You could tell that Tyrann Mathieu's absence really affected things in the back end and the secondary with his versatility. However, if you look at it, if Mathieu's out there, you don't get the play, some of those big plays that you had. Anton Kaysen, he picked off that pick six, and then the interception in the overtime, which gave the Cardinals the ball. Kaysen wouldn't be out there if Tyrann Mathieu were healthy. Likewise, Tony Jefferson was the reason that ball that Fitzpatrick threw in the overtime. Jefferson was the reason that ball fluttered out of there into just right where Kaysen was going, because he hit Fitzpatrick. Jefferson isn't in the game if Rashad Johnson's healthy. There's one thing we haven't seen a lot from. I know that Jefferson has more ability near the line of scrimmage than Johnson. Johnson is almost always left out there as the safety valve back there. That particular play with Jefferson doesn't happen. And it's really interesting. I really love the fact that these guys behind the injured players really stepped up. And it's kind of one of those things, well, what would this have happened? What would have happened, what wouldn't have happened were Matthew or Johnson been out there to begin with?
Yeah, and you look at the defense in general, and I just don't think that they're in the position, anyways, where they have to make said plays. If Matthew's out there, they're just and obviously it was just one game, but they're just such a dynamic and different defense on the back end. He's, like I said, he's their most versatile defender. He does so much, and he offers so much to them, and losing him obviously is a huge deal. And now you're playing more base packages. You're playing, a little bit less of different, disguised coverages in the back end. You have to do more basic things because, Tony Jefferson now, but before Rashad Johnson, isn't going to be able to offer you the dynamic, different type of options that Tyrann did, and so that's going to be a difficult thing to replace. And I think that was a bigger thing than kind of what Peterson was talking about. Getting used to things in the back end. Well, I think more of it was that they just they have to get used to playing base coverages again. They have to be used to playing different mans and different, zones and things of that nature, as opposed to being able to do the really, unique things that Bowles was able to do with that group back there. It did put Jeremiah Bell in a lot of awkward positions, and his, games have shown that, and he's not, great, but he has done enough where he's allowed them to do different things, and now you have, a different result in the back there, and it's gonna be, it may be just this 1 week thing, and hopefully it's not the rest of the season, because you really hate to end it on a low note with the 2-game losing streak to the division.
And so with that, let's talk about the hope for the playoffs. We know the scenarios. Cardinals sitting at 9-5. The most likely scenario, basically, the tiebreakers are not kind to the Cardinals. The fact that the 49ers defeated the Seahawks in San Francisco took any possible divisional tiebreaker out of the favor of the Cardinals. The Cardinals, had they won out and had Seattle defeated San Francisco, that would have given Arizona a 3-3 record in the division. San Francisco would have a 3-3 record in the division. And assuming the Cardinals beat San Francisco, then they would have both had the split there, the split in the division. Then the Cardinals would have had the tiebreak for their common games against the AFC South and the NFC South, where the Cardinals did absolutely fantastic, going 7-1 on the season. But now they're in a situation where they can't end up in a tie with San Francisco. They can't end up in a 3-way tie with the Panthers in San Francisco. And so they need some really unlikely things to happen. What's actually the most likely, but still not probable, if the Cardinals can still make the playoffs if they lose one game, losing in Seattle, defeating San Francisco, but it requires that San Francisco defeat the Falcons in Week 16, and that Carolina lose their final 2 games. And then that would put the Cardinals and Panthers, that would take care of because the 49ers would bump up to the 5 seed, and the Cardinals would surpass Carolina for the 6 seed. That's the actually most likely, the most viable situation. How much hope do you hold? At this point, I don't want to write off the playoffs simply because of the track record we've seen Bruce Arians have. Bruce Arians tends to have teams that have a little bit of magic, if you will. Some magical type things happen. So I don't want to be the negative Nancy in here and say, no, it's not going to happen. But I'm open to the fact that Arians there's something about Bruce Arians that brings some sort of excitement and magic where good things happen for teams. But at the same time, if you look at the matchups over the last 2 weeks for both the 49ers and the Cardinals and the Panthers, just seem very improbable. How much hope do you hold out to that the Cardinals actually sneak their way into the postseason?
0, and that's just because I don't want to get my hopes up at all. I tweeted it out the other day. It's honestly easier for me just to look at this from a logical standpoint and say there's just no way the Cardinals can make the playoffs. I mean, I know mathematically there is a way, but you have so much to rely on for other teams to be able to get into the playoffs. It just makes it difficult to see where losses are going to come from. Basically at this point, if a win from Carolina and a win from San Francisco this week and it's over, and it doesn't matter really what the Cardinals do in their game. So it's just a frustrating thing. And like I kind of said on Twitter, I can handle the fact that they'll be 10-6 if they find a way to win one of these next 2 games and not in the playoffs better than I could if they were in the playoffs right now, but had to win both of these games to stay in it and somehow coughed one of them up and that cost them. I can deal with not being in the playoffs and just missing it because better teams, were in front of you the whole time rather than, losing it in the end because you couldn't hold serve when you needed to. So I've kind of reserved myself to saying it's over. It was a great season, and let's win the last 2 and be a force within the division, because then at least you're at 3-3, and you can kind of hang your hat on that you went 500 in the best division in football.
Yeah, and actually I'm eerily scared about where the Cardinals are at. Before the season began, I predicted, predictions really mean nothing. That's it. I could foresee this situation happening. The Cardinals were 9-5. I figured they won a game or 2. I can't remember where I predicted the wins, but I thought they would win a game where they lost, and I thought they would lose a game that they would win. But heading into Week 16, I thought that they would be 9-5, and that they'd lose their final 2 games. They would just fall short of the playoffs, and I honestly think that I hope that doesn't happen, but I totally can see the scenario in which that does happen, where San Francisco is going to beat the Falcons. They're rolling again. Cardinals likely aren't going to win in Seattle. It would make a great storyline. That would be an amazing story considering the shellacking they took last year, 58-0, and just the way that Seattle manhandled them in Arizona earlier in the season. But to also have the Saints beat the Panthers, and so going into Week 17, there's a shot. And if they beat San Francisco, I can see that totally happening. But talking about that, we know that the playoff situation isn't super likely. Even if they finish 9-7, they finish 10-6, they finish 11-5, even they don't make the playoffs. How should Cardinals fans view this season? Should it be one of disappointment because they didn't make the playoffs? Should they be proud of the team for the strides that they made? Should we be optimistic for the future? Pleased with the changes that have? There is a lot of emotions that inside me. I'm enjoying them. When I say as a fan, I am enjoying this. It's such a thrill to follow a team and to cover a team that is in the mix and they are winning. And they have a chance to make the postseason, even if it is, right now, mathematically improbable. But at the same time, the expectations for the team, they wanted the playoffs. And so it will be a disappointment for them. They'll be able to look back and say, yeah, we made great strides, but we didn't win key games. We lost. There were 2 games, a San Francisco game early in the season where they felt that they were right there. The 11-point lead they lost in St. Louis in Week 1. So there's going to be a sour taste in the mouth. But how should we feel? How are you going to feel, Seth, at the end of the season assuming that they don't make the playoffs?
Well, I'll put a caveat on it. The last two games will decide my feelings on the season, and that's because I look at this schedule that you and I looked at the beginning of the year, and we kind of said, okay. I mean, you said nine wins, and you thought they'd steal a game, and find a way to win 9 games, and then I looked at the schedule and I saw 6 wins, and I saw some good teams that they'd catch at bad times and things of that nature. You look at the schedule now and where it's at, and it really wasn't a good schedule. I mean, they didn't play a whole lot of good teams. Their best win of the season is probably Carolina, and at the time, the Panthers had only won 2 games, so they weren't really the Panthers that are now kind of rolling. So, all that being said, it really, to me, hinges on what happens these last 2 games. If you find a way to get to 11-5 and you don't make the playoffs, I think you can't be anything but happy because, again, you found a way to go 3-3 in the division. On the flip side, if you go 9-7 and you go 1-5 in the division again, well, what you accomplished basically was you won games you should have, and then you lost all the games that were toss-ups, and that's what, so then to me the question is, you did what you were supposed to do, but you didn't improve on what you should have been to begin with. When I looked at it again at the beginning of the season, I saw games like the Falcons, the Texans, and the Colts being games that they probably would lose. They won those games. They won all those games handily, and those teams, and this isn't to take anything away from the Cardinals, but those teams just didn't end up being what anybody expected them to be. I know the Colts record says otherwise, but they're really not that great of a team, and now you look at it and you've got a chance to really kind of cement your first season as coach as Bruce Arians and Carson Palmer, and you have 2 games to do it, and I think you need to do it. Some fans are going to be like, oh, it's 9-7, only the 4th winning season in history of the team since they moved to Arizona, and my response to that just is, just because previous teams have always been bad doesn't mean you should accept, barely over 500 as something great. So that's just my philosophy on this.
And I completely understand that. I mean, there is the perspective of Cardinals fans, and rightfully so. We've watched so much bad football. If you follow the Cardinals, you Arizona Cardinals fans out there, if you followed the Cardinals since before they moved Arizona University to Phoenix Stadium, then you know how just dreadful the football has been, of every year being a disappointment, where there are moves in the offseason, there's this glimmer of hope. It's going to be different this year. We're going to win some games. And then it's 5 wins. It's 4 wins. And they've had 3 8-8 seasons. They had a 9-7 season in '98. They had 9-7 in 2008. Then 10-6 in 2009. But pretty much the rest. I mean, they managed an 8-8 in 2007. We just see the wheels fall off year after year. And so there is something to be said about being very pleased with the season, especially with the new leadership. It really is what Michael Bidwill had in mind when he hired Bruce Arians and Steve Keim. The idea was to change things around, make them competitive. Now, they've said the turnaround, it was quick in Seattle, it was quick in San Francisco with the new coaching staffs. And guess what? Every goal they've met, at least going into the season, has been met. And so I'm optimistic that way. There are still obviously lots of challenges heading into the offseason, but, in the moment, you're disappointed because they got on a roll, and you're like, they could do this. They could postseason. And with the defense they have and how things are turning around offensively, they've become pretty consistently offensively. You could, with a couple of things going their way, they can make a little bit of noise in the playoffs. I mean, win a game on the road, that it didn't seem out of the question. But then you take a step back and it's like, that's a bummer. it's still been a great ride. I mean, especially after the dumpster fire that it's been between Derek Anderson or Max Hall, John Skelton and Kevin Cobb, Ryan Lindley, Brian Hoyer, and you bring in Carson Palmer, and if you look at things, that's what's going to happen. Over the last 2 weeks, based on where he's at statistically, he's going to have himself a season that almost people, hey, you can just plug in those 4,000 yards and 22 touchdowns that he threw in Oakland, and look, you're going to have a better team. That's almost what happened. He's going to throw for, 300 yards away from 4,000 yards. He's got 21 touchdown passes on the season. But it's almost like he took a carbon copy of his last year's stats, almost placed them in the Cardinals team and said, oh, now they're going to win more games. And that's what a lot of people in the offseason were speculating. Incorrectly so. It really you couldn't do that because of the change in so many things with the team, but it's been that way. And so I, for one, while I'm disappointed and I'm sad that this team that is playing so well and that they're probably not going to make the postseason, I want for them, those players who have worked so hard, and for that coaching staff to be rewarded for buying in. But at the same time, it's been great. They've been in the mix all year, and it's coming down to the last couple of weeks. You can't, as a fan, ask for more than that every year.
And I was looking back because I was curious. I couldn't remember off the top of my head, and I looked back the other day what Ken Wisenhunt did in his first season as head coach as the Cardinals. I knew they went 8-8. I just didn't remember what they did in 2006, the previous season, and they were 5-11 as well. So it's kind of eerily similar what happened between the start of the Wisenhunt era and kind of the start of the Arians era. If they don't win one of these next two games, 9-7 versus 8-8. I mean, you're talking about a toss-up of one game somewhere in either season, and that was interesting to me. But the more interesting thing, and the thing that I really looked at, was who were the kind of big pickups for the Cardinals in Arians' first season, or Wisenhunt's first season as head coach. And realistically, they had, they didn't really have a lot of big name guys that came in, and they, it was Edgerrin James' second year. They drafted Levi Brown. He played right tackle. It was a lot of Denny's guys. That's the difference. Arians and Keim have kind of remade this roster. The foundation is a lot of Wisenhunt and Graves guys, but the guys that have changed the idea of the Cardinals, if you will, that kind of have made them look different this year are all new guys, on those 1 and 2 year deals. And so that is the one concern I have about missing this opportunity of going 10-6 or even 11-5 and not making the playoffs, because then you end up, is it going to end up being a wasted season, so to speak, with all the turnover that's going to happen in the off season? And I know we have time to go into that later, but that was one of the differences I saw in the rosters, is there wasn't this huge churn in the, from the Green to the Wisenhunt first, year 1 to year 2. And you can put a lot of that credit, and I don't think Denny Green gets enough credit in the history of the Cardinals for putting a lot of talent on this roster for Wisenhunt. But Wisenhunt coached it up and did that, and then all of a sudden, you have this completely separate thing where, again, you have a lot of key players that are of the Wisenhunt Graves era, but this roster is really remade and is really the a Keim Arians roster, and they've put their stamp on it, and they're 9-5, and they have a chance to do something kind of special in terms of Cardinal success, and so we'll see what happens here.
Well, yeah, it definitely is the case, and Arians has kind of beaten this drum a little bit, is the fact that they've talked about how much turnover there's been on our roster. And turnover happens on almost any NFL roster now, just the way things are. And as long as I think the Cardinals can keep this up, I know they're going to try and keep a few of these key players, the players around. But it's not like they haven't. Now, granted, they haven't had the success. I mean, they've had the injury bug this year, but they have players underneath, and they brought in key veteran players who were still left on. I mean, Dansby, yeah, Abraham, Winston. Even though Winston, by all our accounts, is not having a great year, and so you bring in guys that did not make that first wave of contracts and sat around for a long time. If the current tone of free agency continues to be that way, if Steve Keim's earning his money, he's going to do the same thing year after year, because there will be veterans out there who can make significant contributions, and to do so on the cheap as that happened this year. I don't know if we're going to see an uptick in free agent contracts for veterans. That seems to be the new wave. You're going to pay more for the guys coming off the rookie contracts, and then they're going to make their money then, and then after that they're kind of going to get nickeled and dimed unless they're absolute superstars.
Yeah, and that, that'll be the interesting thing, because one of the, I've said it before, one of the concerns I have is if you can get, did you catch lightning in the bottle with all these guys? Carlos Dansby has, played out of his mind. I don't think he's had a better season in his career, to be honest with you. Like you said, you've got Palmer, and he's taken a lot of shots this year, and he should be back next year. I don't really think there's ever, I don't think there's ever been a discussion over the last couple of weeks that, he shouldn't be back, barring injury. And so that's the question is, if you do turn over the roster again, and likely not to the extent that you did this year, but if you do turn over
you don't have to get
again,
off the stink of that's the thing. When you have a bad team and you don't turn over the roster, there's generally something wrong, because you have to get rid of the stink of the bad roster, especially with how things went at the end of last. You had to turn over the roster, whether or not the guys are talented or not. You had to do it.
Yeah, well, and the interesting thing was, and I was just looking at it, the other day, but they could have up to 4 new starters on the offensive line next year, depending on what they decide to do with Darren College. You look at, do you really want Paul Faneca back at right guard? I don't see any way they don't bring center line back, but, who knows there. But they could have 4 new starters on the offensive line. They could have 5 to 6 new starters on the defense. Again, it's going to be key for Keim. Like you said, Keim's going to have to make his money, because that kind of is the new NFL. When you don't have that franchise quarterback to, Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, those type of guys, even heck, you look what Joe Flacco has done over the last couple of weeks. He hasn't been great, but all of a sudden they're in the playoffs, it looks like. And, when you don't have that guy, the young guy, that can guarantee you that you can change your roster over every year, that's what will make it difficult. And so I think that's the combination of the offseason. Can they maintain the level of play as well as turning over the roster as much as they need to for next year as well? And, I don't want to go into next year too much, because I still feel like there's significance in these games, even if we don't feel like the playoffs is within reach. There's the significance of you can finally kind of slay the dragon, so to speak, especially if you find a way to win in Seattle, because you can beat Seattle in Seattle. If I would have told you that at the beginning of the year, you would have kind of laughed, and maybe you still do. Maybe you still
kind of
do.
Still do. You kind of do, but there's just enough of this team. You say, why not?
And that's the thing is, why not? And, logically speaking, and you and I have both hit on it, they're just so beat up at so many, important positions. We still don't know about Fitz. Floyd seems to have, his injuries have to be bothering him. I don't see any other way about it. They were without Hausler. Maybe that was done on purpose so he could be healthy for this week. Now there's questions again about Ellington and his legs. It's just, and even Palmer's hobbled, and going up against that Seattle defense, I don't know if that's necessarily the best thing to have. So, but like you said, Arians is in his, I don't know, I can't remember off the top of my head how many games he coached last year, but in his, brief 2-year stint as a head coach, he has done wonderful, miraculous things so far, and maybe it continues.
Now, so let's look at that. Look at that Seattle game, because obviously the Seattle, they look unbeatable at home, but they're not. I mean, as good as they've been, they do have some flaws. I mean, look at their offensive line; they're just beat up to all heck, and yet they still. I mean, that's where a guy like Russell Wilson can. I'm going to gush on Russell Wilson for a little bit, just because. As a Cardinals fan, it's really easy to hate San Francisco. It's always been easy to hate San Francisco just because of the history there, the pedigree with the success. And I'll admit, as an early football fan, it was hard not to like San Francisco back in the day when they had Joe Montana and Bill Walsh and Steve Young. Everyone kind of liked them, unless you were a Cowboys fan. But now that they're actually part of the division and just the way they go, Jim Harbaugh is, they go from Mike Singletary, who was crazy, not terribly likable for opposing fans, to Jim Harbaugh, who's a guy that you would love to have for your coach, but he just, it upsets you. And the types of players, Vernon Davis, you just don't like. Then they've got a quarterback with a chip on their shoulder and Colin Kaepernick, who rubs some people. It's a really easy team to dislike a lot. And the Seahawks, their coach Pete Carroll's kind of the same way, but they've got that kid in Russell Wilson, and this kid's gonna be a star. I mean, he's already he's gonna be a big time star, and we're just gonna be. It's gonna be frustrating for Cardinals fans to see him. And he's a special kid, and see him lead that team. And he's just likable enough that even if you're a division rival, you have to feel like you root a little bit for him because he's so dang likable on top of everything.
And the frustrating thing is, as you said, their offensive line is really not good. And yet he's been unbelievable. And that's not, you don't expect Carson Palmer he's not as athletic as Russell Wilson. He's obviously not as young as Russell Wilson. Carson Palmer's taken a lot more hits in his career, but you look at how bad Seattle's offensive line has played this year because of injuries, because of just ineffectiveness. And then you look at how bad the Cardinals' offensive line has been. And again, not taking anything away from Palmer, but you look at it and you go, it is possible for him, it is possible to have a terrible offensive line and still be a good team. You just need the quarterback. And it just, they just don't have the quarterback. And again, this isn't to take anything away from Palmer, but you look at the disparity between Wilson and Palmer, and that's kind of where you look at it and go, okay, that's the mountain that they have to climb, because as long as Russell Wilson is upright in Seattle, that team is going to be, the one to beat always. Whether it's like last year where they're the best, wild card team, or whether it's like this year and they're just the juggernaut of the NFL. That team is just so good, and he's the one that spearheads it. And I honestly, I don't think he gets enough credit for what he does in Seattle. I know Cardinals fans probably hate hearing that and hate hearing anything talked about him, but you look at that offensive line, as you said, Jess, that offensive line is terrible. Marshawn Lynch is still a really good back in this league, but if you compared, I think if you took the quarterback's out of the equation, and you compared offenses side by side, there's maybe 4 guys on the Seahawks that you take over the Cardinals, and the rest you probably take Cardinals guys, and then you look at it and you put Russell Wilson in there, and it's like, okay, he just elevates everybody's game. You know, Michael Floyd and Larry Fitzgerald are better receivers than Sidney Rice and Golden Tate and the other guys that Seattle runs out there week to week. Yet Russell Wilson puts up the numbers he does. He does it behind the bad offensive line. He does it while Marshawn Lynch carries the ball a ton. It really is amazing what they've done there and how special they've become as a team, and we haven't even talked about the defense. So, but to look at it from a positive point of view, the offensive line is terrible, as you talked about. The Cardinals' strength outside of last week, for some odd reason, is getting to the quarterback. They've done a really good job rushing the passer lately. They have, John Abraham has, again, outside of this last game, has been dynamic and really made that 1-year or that 2-year contract look like a stroke of genius. And Calais Campbell is maybe the second best 3-4 defensive end in the NFL behind J.J. Watt at this point. So you just look at it and you say, if the defense does enough and plays up to their capability, and if the offense finds a way to not have those lulls that they are known to have, and they've had them even in good games. Even last week, they had that lull in the second half where they kind of just went into this, okay, we're gonna run the ball, we're going to, we're not going to take any aggressive approach to this game, and now, they can't do that, especially against Seattle. They can't start slow. They can't, the defense can't allow points early, and the offense can't struggle to get on track early. It sounds really simple. Oh, the offense has to play good, the defense has to play good. It sounds really simple, and it is, but it comes down to, can the offense make plays consistently, and can the defense, hold on long enough if the offense isn't making plays early?
Well, it's not like they didn't get to. They got after Russell Wilson in that game in Glendale. They sacked him 3 times. They hit him 9 times. They got to him, and John Abraham had his 2 sacks that game. They got to him, but he made plays down the field in breakdowns and coverage, and then they just weren't good enough offensively. Now, granted, playing in Seattle is going to be a whole different ball game because Seattle's a completely different team there with the crowd noise, but they should be able to put pressure. I mean, what's really good is that, at least so far, it's a bad matchup, and I heard it on the radio, it's kind of like the Seattle-Arizona matchup is kind of like that Stanford-Arizona State matchup, where Arizona State played great against everyone else, but the type of team that Stanford was just not a good matchup for how their team was constructed. And I'm not going to quite go that far, because you look at how Arizona's defense was constructed a season ago, and they were constructed really well to defeat quarterback, to make things very tough on offenses like Aaron Rodgers or Matt Ryan, where they threw the ball a lot, but ill-equipped to handle the teams in the division where they are heavy run first, like Seattle and San Francisco. This year, right now, statistically, Arizona's got the number 1 run defense in the NFL. They're number 1. And so they are in a situation where they can match up strength for strength. And against Seattle the first time, Seattle's running game got a little bit of the better of the defense, and it was Russell Wilson scrambling. They didn't do a good job of containing him, and he made plays with his legs. I don't want to think. I think this game is within reach, but it's one of those games where they're going to have to keep it close and make plays, because I don't think there's going to be any way that they blow them out. So they're going to have to be very disciplined through the entire game and make key plays late in the game, or to, offensively make some play, or defensively make something happen that stops the Seahawks. Other ways, I think this game has the potential to be just a very good, close game. Or it falls apart.
Well, and here's the crazy thing about the first game, and you hate to bring up things that will be connotated as negative, but it's just the reality. The first game, the turnover battle was even. They both had 2 turnovers. The Cardinals held the Seahawks to 344 yards of total offense. The problem was the offense only gained 234 yards of total offense, and they just never got on track. They put up 22 points, and that's a nice number, and I think that's the third highest. Yeah, it's the third highest point total given up by the Seahawks this year. But it didn't matter because they could not sustain offense. You look at, again, the yardage. They only gained the Cardinals gained 234 yards. That's the sixth least amount of yards given up by the Seahawks this year. The Cardinals, again, you don't want to beat on the offense and just say, oh, it's offense. But in reality, when you play Seattle, you have to put pressure on their defense, and you have to then in turn put pressure on their offense by forcing them to make plays. And if you don't do that, if you allow their offense to run the ball, allow Russell Wilson to use play action for big plays down the field, if you allow their team to be balanced, you're playing into their strength, and that's where they can beat you, and that's where they can really, really hurt you. And, that's what they have to worry about.
So, if you had to give a percentage chance, what are the odds of Arizona coming out of Seattle with an upset victory? If you could say the win of the year, perhaps the win of the year for the entire league.
I'd say 5%, and that's really, really low, but that's kind of how it is with this team. The Seahawks, as you said, it would probably end up being the best win of this season. It's definitely easily the best win of the Cardinal season, and it's by far going to be the best win of the Bruce Arians era in probably his career so far, even when you include the Colts. So it's an interesting thing, and that's why I put it so low, is because they're going to force the Cardinals to throw the ball. They're going to force the Cardinals to try to make plays through the air. And, Arians has changed up what he's doing offensively. They're throwing a lot more short routes. They're going to much quicker drops and getting the ball out faster, which has really helped the Cardinals not have to, or the offensive line to not have to block as much. But in that first Seattle game, they didn't really throw the ball down the field that much. Of his 45 thrown passes, Palmer only threw the ball over 10 yards just 15 times. So, a third of the time it was going over 10 yards. That's not a ton. So it's got to come down to, can the Cardinals, continually move the ball? Can they put pressure on Seattle's offense to beat Arizona? Because I think, and maybe I'm wrong in this, but I think if the Cardinals went in there and they put up 30 points, and that would be the most points that Seattle's allowed all season, I believe. or no, they have allowed 34 in that loss to Indy, but it would be the most points they've allowed at home all season. If they went in and they put up 34 points, 30, 31, whatever points on the Seahawks, and lost that game, I honestly, while the fans would still be disappointed, I honestly think that they would feel like, okay, we can play with this team. They just, a better quarterback just beat us at home, as opposed to if it's like the game in Glendale where, the score is not really that bad, but it wasn't really ever as close as the score showed it to be, and you never really had that belief that this team was going to win the game. At least to me, I would feel better about if they were in the game till the end, they put up plenty of points and somehow lost. Still, I would be okay with that. But yeah, the percentage is low, and I just don't like their chances.
I'm going to bump that percentage for me up. I am much more positive when it comes to this sort of thing. It's the homer in me. I think I give them a 20%. It's still really low, but a 20% chance of winning. And I'm looking here at the stat sheet before. One of the biggest things that hurt the Cardinals in that game in Glendale was the fact that Seattle was really able to neutralize Andre Ellington. He had 5 touches that game. He made no impact in the running game, 3 to carry. Now, granted, it was only 3 times he carried the ball for a total of a yard. He had 2 catches for 10 yards. He was targeted 3 other times. There were a chance for a couple of plays, but Ellington is a better player now. They're getting him the ball more often and in better places. It'll be interesting to see if Seattle is able to neutralize him again, because he's, as I just saw from Sean Church from our site just not too long ago during the show, that almost a quarter of Ellington's touches have gone for over 10 yards. That's insane. And they took that away completely. Seattle did from Ellington. They didn't run the ball well. The 18 carries for 30 yards. Arizona's been running the ball so much better. And so I expect, because the Cardinals will be able to move the ball, I think they'll be able to run the ball better than they did in the first time around, which gives them more. I think it's going to be more like a 20% shot at winning that game. So here we are at the end. We got the Seattle game coming up, biggest game of the season. It's a game really not many people believe that it's laughable to think, we're gonna get a win. That's more the homerish fans saying that. Yes, I think there's a chance. I think the Cardinals are more equipped to do it now than they were earlier in the season, because they do have their offense clicking, as opposed to earlier in the season. Yes, they're banged up on defense, but they're getting contributions. So we have the Seahawks coming up. They may be eliminated next time we talk, guys. So, Seth, thanks for coming on tonight. Any big predictions you see for the weekend?
The biggest prediction I have is that I think the Cardinals will show that they are close. And while I know that's disappointing that they still will, I think they'll lose this game and be officially eliminated from the playoffs. I think that they'll show that they are close, and that this team is, you can start looking ahead to 2014 and say, okay, was this, lightning in a bottle, or was this the first step in kind of the ascension of the Arizona Cardinals? And that's what the focus, for me at least, I'm going to try to put my focus on after this week if they do lose.
My big prediction because we closed the show up, is that while I think the Cardinals will lose, I think that everything will fall into place for a Week 17 decision for the playoffs for the Cardinals. I think Carolina will lose. I think San Francisco will win. So Arizona will not be eliminated this weekend. They will go into Week 17 with a shot to make it to the playoffs. This is Revenge of the Birds Radio. Thank you guys for listening, whether you are listening live or if you're listening to the downloaded version. If you are listening downloaded, go ahead and subscribe to iTunes or on Stitcher Radio. Thanks for listening. I'm Jess. That's Seth. Have yourself a good night. Thanks for talking to us, Seth, tonight.
Have a good one.
You've been listening to Revenge of the Birds. Keep the conversation going by visiting revengeofthebirds.com. Follow us on Twitter at revengeofbirds. You can also find us on iTunes at facebook.com/revengeofthebirds.